My name is Clara Bennett, 33, a brand designer who's learned how to stay composed at family tables that feel more like boardrooms. I came back to Sedona for my father's 27th wedding anniversary, a celebration I didn't want to attend but couldn't avoid. The house looked the same: warm lights, expensive silence, and people who smiled too carefully. My stepmother was born in Spain. She carried her accent like a jewel, switching to Spanish whenever she wanted a private world. Over the years, that world never included me. Dinner started with polite laughter and the soft sound of glasses clinking. My younger sister leaned toward her mother, her voice smooth and almost affectionate. Then she said in Spanish, clearly, confidently, "She talks big, but does nothing." My father chuckled lightly. My stepmother gave a subtle nod. They thought their secret language still kept me outside their walls. They were wrong. I didn't flinch. My hand stayed still on the glass. Every instinct told me to speak up, but instead I smiled, the kind of smile that hides both fury and power. Years of being underestimated had taught me something: silence can cut deeper than words. That night, I decided I wouldn't let their whispers define me anymore. They didn't know I'd understood every word and what that silence would eventually cost them. They didn't know I was fluent in Spanish, so I taught them a lesson they'll never forget. Before we begin, tell me, what time is it, where you're watching, and which city are you in? I want to know how far this story has traveled. The morning after felt too quiet, like the house itself was holding its breath. Every family has its hierarchy. Ours was built the day my father remarried. I was 6 when my father, Victor, married Elena, the woman who would become my stepmother. I remember the red cliffs of Sedona, her pale silk dress, and the way she said my father's name like it was music. Everyone said she was exactly what Victor needed. I didn't understand. A few months later, Elena was pregnant. My father's joy filled the house, and suddenly, I wasn't the center anymore. He painted a nursery in soft yellow, smiling wider than I'd ever seen. When my half-sister Marina was born, Elena's Spanish relatives filled our home. The air smelled of paella and jasmine. I didn't understand their language, but I understood enough to feel excluded. They'd smile politely, then switch to Spanish and laugh. My father acted like he didn't hear. Growing up in that house was like living between two channels, English and Spanish. At breakfast, I'd talk about school, but Elena would answer my father in Spanish, her words shutting me out. He'd nod reply in English and glance at me as if hoping I didn't notice. But I did. Marina became the center of everything. Elena adored her, and my father followed. They called her our bright one, and I learned every compliment to her carried a quiet comparison to me. I was the calm one, the independent one, words that sounded kind but meant distance. Elena's kindness had edges. She'd praise my drawings, then suggest I try something practical. She'd say she admired my independence, which meant you're on your own. My father never contradicted her. He'd smile, hold her hand, and change the subject. I used to think that was love. Now I know it was avoidance. By the time I was a teenager, I understood the geography of silence in that house. When Victor came home tired, Elena switched to Spanish before asking about money. When she was angry, her voice dropped to a low hum behind closed doors. When relatives called, she'd step into the garden and speak in quick, deliberate tones. I didn't know the words, but I knew they carried decisions I wasn't meant to hear. My father softened it with excuses. "You know how your stepmother gets when she's stressed," he'd say. I stopped asking him to translate. Every time I did, he'd sigh. "It's not important." But somehow, everything not important shaped my life. Marina never had to ask. She moved between languages, easily fluent in both privilege and approval. By 10, she mimicked Elena's elegance and quiet arrogance. When guests came, she'd sit beside our father, translating for him with a perfect smile that said, "I belong." I'd sit across the table pretending I didn't mind. Once at 16, I overheard Elena telling Marina on the patio, "You must always be better than her. People remember the one who wins." Marina laughed softly, and I realized I was being raised as a comparison, not a daughter. My father never noticed. He lived orbiting Elena's moods, mistaking peace for love. Your stepmother means well, he'd say. You and Marina will grow closer someday. But in our house, love had conditions: fluency, obedience, and silence. When I left for college, Elena hugged me for the first time. You're such a strong girl, she said. Don't forget to write your father. Not us, him. I thought distance would fix things. It didn't. Holidays were the same table, the same two languages, the same roles. Elena and Marina talked. Victor smiled. I pretended to belong. One Christmas, Marina flipped through my sketchbook and laughed. You still draw? Dad says you could have joined his firm if you were serious. I said nothing. Elena smiled, sipping her wine. She's creative, darling, but not everyone's meant for business. She said it in English this time to make sure I heard. I remember thinking how ironic it was the woman who spoke two languages used both to remind me which side I stood on. Their laughter always stopped when I entered the room. Marina would glance at me, amusement in her eyes, as if to say, "You don't understand this world." And she was right. I wasn't supposed to. Years later, when I opened my own design firm, my father congratulated me with polite surprise. That's wonderful, Clara, he said. You've always been independent. He said it the way people do when they didn't expect it. Marina sent a text. Proud of you, Clara. No punctuation, no warmth. Elena said nothing at all. That was our family affection, measured truth, diluted recognition, delayed. We lived in halves, half praise, half acceptance, half love. And somehow I survived in those halves. Looking back, I realized silence wasn't submission, it was defiance. Every time I held my tongue, every time I stayed still, I refused to play their game. They thought I was obedient. They mistook patience for weakness. But in a house divided by languages, silence became my translation. I learned to stay quiet, not because I agreed, but because silence was safer. The next evening, the house smelled like rosemary and secrets. Candles lined the counter, soft jazz drifted through the kitchen, and the sound of glasses echoed off marble. Elena directed everything with her usual precision, every gesture elegant and calculated. I stood near the window pretending to check my phone, while she and Marina arranged flowers on the dining table. Their voices carried low and steady, flowing in Spanish, that familiar wall of sound I wasn't meant to understand. Elena said quietly in Spanish, "We need to adjust the family foundation account." Marina nodded, slipping a folded sheet into her mother's hand. Then came the words that made my chest tighten. "Your father doesn't need to know about the account." I froze. The sentence was soft, casual, but it landed like a slap. I turned slightly still, pretending to scroll through my phone, my reflection catching their movements in the window. The family foundation was supposed to be my father's pride, a symbol of transparency, the legacy he wanted to leave. But hearing those words, "doesn't need to know," turned it into something darker, something hidden. I set my phone on the counter, its camera tilted just right, recording. Then Marina laughed softly. Clara just wants attention like her mother did. Her voice dripped with mockery, sweet and cruel, all at once. Elena didn't correct her. She only replied, still in Spanish. "Don't say that too loudly." They both chuckled, the kind of laughter that doesn't come from humor but from habit. My throat tightened. For years, I'd ignored the whispers that stopped when I entered the room. But that sentence, the one about my mother, cut deeper than anything I'd ever heard. What did Marina mean by that? What did my mother ever do that was worth their scorn? I pressed record on my phone, this time deliberately. My hands shook slightly, but my voice stayed calm. They continued talking about transactions, signatures, timing. Elena's tone was steady, confident. Marina leaned back against the counter, sipping her wine. "Dad trusts you completely," she said. "He'd sign anything if you smiled first." Elena smiled faintly. "That's what makes it easy." I wanted to walk in and demand the truth. But experience had taught me restraint, that silence could be sharper than shouting. So I stood still, listening. Each word confirmed what I had always suspected in this family truth was something negotiated in another language. When they moved toward the pantry, I slipped away quietly, taking my phone with me. Upstairs in my room, I replayed the recording. Their words came through clearly. Your father doesn't need to know. Clara just wants attention like her mother did. I sat on the edge of the bed, every syllable echoing louder the second time. I thought of my mother Renee, the woman who had left when I was 5. I'd been told she couldn't handle my father's world, that she preferred freedom to family. But what if that wasn't the truth? What if she hadn't left? What if she'd been pushed away? The memory of her leaving flashed in my mind, her quiet goodbye, her suitcase by the door, the way she looked back only once. Back then, I thought she was running from us. Now I wondered if she was running from them. I scrolled through my contacts until I found her number 1 I hadn't dialed in years. The last time we spoke was 2 birthdays ago. She'd sent a short message. Hope you're well. I never replied. My thumb hovered over her name for a moment before I pressed call. The line rang 3 times. Then a voice, soft, cautious, familiar. Clara, hi Mom, I said quietly. It's been a while. A pause. Are you all right? I hesitated. Not really. I heard something I wasn't supposed to. She inhaled sharply. You're at the house. Yes, I said. They were talking about Dad, about the foundation, and about you. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy, like the air before a storm. When she spoke again, her tone had changed. Clara, there's something you should know. Something I couldn't tell you before. What do you mean I can't say it over the phone? Meet me tomorrow. Please. Her voice trembled slightly, but it carried a kind of urgency I'd never heard from her before. I wanted to ask more, but she hung up before I could. I sat there for a long time, staring at the blinking light on my phone, the recording still open, the evidence still running. Downstairs, I could hear Elena's laughter again, Marina's voice joining hers in that seamless melodic rhythm. They were planning the next night's anniversary dinner as if nothing had happened. I imagined my father downstairs, smiling, unaware. The thought made something inside me snap, not in anger, but in resolve. For the first time, I wasn't just the quiet one. I wasn't the outsider listening behind closed doors. I was the witness. I saved the recording, labeled it Foundation. Then I opened my suitcase and started packing. Whatever secret my mother had kept, whatever Elena was hiding tomorrow, I was going to find out. That night, I sat awake, the house silent around me. Every tick of the clock felt like a countdown, not to another argument, but to revelation. And for the first time, I didn't feel afraid of what I might hear next. It took me a whole night to decide whether to meet the woman who once walked away from everything, including me. The next morning, I drove north toward Chicago, my phone on silent, my mind louder than the engine. The highway blurred by in long ribbons of gray, and with every mile, the questions I'd buried for years surfaced again. Why had she left? Why hadn't she fought harder? And what was it she couldn't tell me over the phone? When I reached the city, Renee was already waiting at a small cafe near the river. The place looked unchanged from my childhood memories: brick walls, old photographs, the smell of roasted coffee, and rain. She stood when she saw me, her hands trembling slightly before she hid them in her coat pockets. Clara, she said softly, as if the name itself might shatter. You came. You asked me to, I said, my voice even. You said there was something I should know. We sat across from each other, the silence between us heavier than the traffic outside. Finally, she spoke. What you overheard, Elena, and the foundation, it's not new. It's a continuation. She paused, looking down at her cup. Before your father and I divorced, I discovered financial transfers that shouldn't have existed. Money moved from Victor's company to an account in Elena's name. At the time, I thought it was just sloppy bookkeeping. But when I asked questions, she panicked. Panicked how she accused me of stealing. Renee said quietly. Then she convinced your father I was trying to ruin his business. Within a month, I was gone, and Elena was running the foundation. I felt my stomach twist. You tried to expose her, I tried, she said bitterly. But the lawyers she hired were better. I didn't have access to company files, and your father believed every word she said. The only thing I managed to keep was this. She pulled an envelope from her purse, thick yellowed with time. Inside was a photocopy of a contract stamped with company seals and a signature I recognized immediately, my father's. This document shows a transfer to a private account overseas. The witness signature a bank clerk Elena knew personally. I traced the paper with my fingertips. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because you were 5, she said. And later, because I didn't want you to hate your father the way I did. Her voice cracked, but she steadied it. He wasn't cruel, Clara, just blind. And I was tired of fighting someone who refused to see. I looked at her. Really looked. The lines around her eyes weren't just from age, but from exhaustion, the kind that comes from years of being disbelieved. So you left to protect yourself. She nodded slowly. And maybe to protect you, too. Elena wanted full control, and I knew she'd use you against me if I stayed. I exhaled. She did anyway. Renee smiled faintly, a sad recognition. I know. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The rain outside turned heavier, streaking the window like ink. Finally, she leaned forward. You're not safe if you confront her directly. Elena's smart, and Marina's worse. She learned manipulation as her first language. You'll need proof, more than words. I already have proof, I said, holding up my phone. A recording. They talked about hiding the account from Dad. Renee blinked, stunned. Then you're already ahead of me. Maybe, I said. But I need to make it count. I tucked the contract carefully into my bag. I'm not going to destroy them with anger. I'm going to let their own actions do it. Renee's eyes softened. That's what I never could. I lost everything because I let fury speak louder than reason. I smiled faintly. Then I'll do it differently. She reached across the table and touched my hand. Be careful, Clara. They won't go down quietly. Especially her. I squeezed her hand gently. Neither will I. We stayed for another hour, talking less like mother and daughter and more like two survivors comparing scars. She gave me names, accountants, old associates, people who had left Victor's company quietly after Elena took over. Each name was another thread to pull another crack in the foundation. By the time we stood to leave, the rain had stopped. Outside, the city smelled of asphalt and beginnings. Renee buttoned her coat, her eyes glistening in the gray light. When you see your father, she said, remember, he's not the enemy. He's the blind spot. I nodded, tucking that truth somewhere deep. Thank you, I whispered, for not destroying the last piece of the story. She smiled faintly. Just promise me one thing, don't let their lies make you like them. I won't, I said. I'm not here to become them. I'm here to end it. As I drove back to Sedona that night, the city lights faded in the rearview mirror. In the seat beside me, the envelope rustled softly like a heartbeat. Every word, every signature, every lie, all of it was finally coming into focus. They'd built their comfort on secrets and silence. I would dismantle both. Perfection has a sound, the clinking of glasses right before everything shatters. The Sedona mansion glittered that night, all marble floors and golden laughter. Waiters moved like quiet ghosts, balancing champagne and charm. Guests filled every corner, old business partners of my father family friends, and the kind of people who smiled too wide for photographs. Elena floated through the room like a queen in exile, radiant in emerald silk. Marina, her mirror image in a younger frame, darted between guests, reminding everyone she had organized the night in honor of family unity. I stayed near the back, a silent observer in navy. My expression calm enough to be mistaken for peace. Caleb Moore, my longtime friend and business partner, stood by the sound booth, pretending to check cables while his laptop hummed quietly beside mine. Ready, he whispered through his earpiece. Just wait for her cue, I murmured. Timing is everything. At 8 sharp, Marina tapped the microphone, her voice bright with rehearsed joy. Thank you all for coming. Tonight we celebrate not only my father's achievements, but the bond that keeps this family together. Applause followed, polite, warm, and completely undeserved. My father Victor smiled at her from the front row, oblivious to the irony. Then Marina gestured toward the massive screen behind her. We've prepared something special, a tribute video to the incredible journey of our parents, Elena and Victor Bennett. The lights dimmed. Soft piano music began. Images appeared, my father shaking hands at business events, Elena cutting ribbons at charity openings, Marina and me as children in matching dresses, though I knew mine had always been borrowed. Laughter rippled through the crowd as photos of family holidays played, the illusion of happiness perfectly edited. I glanced at Caleb. He caught my signal. 3 clicks later, the video froze on Elena's smiling face, then flickered. The next slide appeared, not a photograph, but a scanned ledger, Family Foundation transfer report. The room fell silent. Another page followed, wire transactions highlighted in red, the words, transferred by Elena Alvarez, glowing underlined across the top. A murmur spread. Someone gasped. Is this part of the tribute? Whispered a woman near the front. Marina's expression collapsed. Turn it off, she hissed, rushing to the laptop, but Caleb had locked the feed. Elena stood motionless, color draining from her face as the screen flipped through page after page, accounts, signatures, balances traced to private holdings overseas. My father rose halfway from his chair. Elena, what is this? His voice trembled more from disbelief than anger. Marina lunged for the projector, but the crowd was already reacting, a mixture of confusion, shock, and thinly veiled judgment. I stepped forward. My heels clicked against the marble, echoing louder than any applause ever had. You said I talk big, but do nothing. I said evenly, my gaze fixed on Elena. Maybe silence was my way of watching you undo yourselves. A few guests turned toward me, unsure whether to leave or listen. I continued, calm but unflinching. That foundation you built, the one you paraded as proof of generosity, it's a shell. Every donation, every speech about compassion, all of it funded by what you took from this family. Elena's lips parted, but no words came. Marina's eyes darted from her mother to the screen, trapped in the reflection of her own downfall. Clara, my father began softly, but I cut him off with a quiet glance. You always told me truth comes at a cost, I said. I'm just here to collect the receipt. The final slide appeared, a time-stamped transfer document bearing both Elena's and Marina's initials. Gasps erupted again, followed by silence thick enough to drown in. I reached for my glass of water, lifted it slightly toward Elena. To perfection, I said. May we all learn what it really sounds like when it breaks. Caleb ended the projection. The lights came back on, slowly revealing faces pale and uncertain. A reporter from one of the charity magazines whispered something into her phone. Somewhere near the back, someone began to clap, a slow, stunned rhythm, then stopped, realizing it wasn't the right kind of applause. Elena finally spoke, her voice faint. You don't understand. No, I said. For once, everyone does. She looked at me, then at my father, and I saw something flicker, not guilt, but fear. The kind that comes when the script you've written for everyone else finally turns against you. I turned and walked toward the exit, Caleb following close behind. Behind us, the clinking of glasses resumed, not celebration this time, but the fragile sound of a legacy fracturing in real time. The morning after the party, the Sedona mansion felt like a museum of consequences. Reporters camped by the gates. The phone rang until it went hoarse. By noon, 2 of my father's partners had withdrawn from the board. Charity sponsors quietly paused their involvement. The story spread faster than anyone could control. Family Foundation under investigation for fraud. Inside, the air smelled of burned perfume and panic. Elena locked herself in her room, the same one where she once rehearsed her public smiles. Marina sat at the piano, pressing random keys like a child trying to find a note that would make everything rewind. I watched from the doorway, unseen. For years, they'd filled this house with noise, laughter, gossip, soft lies, and now it was finally quiet. My father was in his office, head in his hands. The first time I'd seen him small. When I entered, he didn't look up right away. "It's all true, isn't it?" he asked finally. His voice was the sound of something collapsing inward. "Yes," I said. "I didn't make any of it up." He nodded slowly, as though the confirmation hurt less than the silence that followed. "Marina said you planned this, that you wanted revenge." I took a deep breath. I wanted truth. Whatever followed was theirs to own. He sighed, staring at a photograph on his desk, him, Elena, and me, taken years ago at a company gala. "Your mother warned me," he said quietly. "Not about Elena, about myself. She said my need to keep the peace would one day destroy it." I didn't reply. The words had already fulfilled their prophecy. "What will you do now?" he asked. "Nothing," I said simply. "I'm done fixing things I didn't break." That ended the conversation. He didn't stop me when I turned toward the door. Outside, the desert heat pressed against the windows like an unspoken sentence. I walked past the fountain, the marble steps, the ghosts of every dinner where I'd been told to smile. As I reached the driveway, I heard Marina's voice behind me, sharp, desperate. "You think you're the hero, you just ruined us." I turned once. "No," I said. "You did that yourself. I just turned on the lights." Then I got in the car and drove. The road out of Sedona cut through a desert the color of rusted gold. Wind scattered dust across the hood. The radio played something faint and old, and the sky stretched wide enough to swallow every memory. My phone buzzed twice, my father's name on the screen. I let it ring until it stopped. Then I opened the contact list, found his number, and pressed delete. No anger, just the soft click of closure. Renee's words drifted back to me. Some roots aren't worth saving. She had been right. Family wasn't about who planted the tree, but who watered it when storms came. I had spent years hoping the Bennetts would remember I was part of their soil. Tonight, I accepted that I'd grown elsewhere. The city lights faded behind me. The desert opened like an unwritten chapter. Above it all, the moon rose deep red, almost scarred. I pulled over, stepped out, and leaned against the car. The air smelled of iron and endings. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to speak, to defend, or to prove anything. The truth had done its job. And peace finally sounded like silence again. 6 months passed since the night everything broke. Phoenix was warmer, louder, and more alive than Sedona ever was. My new design studio sat on the corner of a quiet street where sunlight spilled through the glass every morning. The sign above the door read, "Bennett and Moore Creative Studio, Caleb's idea, not mine." He said it sounded like balance, 2 names, one built from history, one from choice. We started small local projects, a coffee shop logo, a boutique redesign, but it was enough. Enough to wake up without dread. Enough to build something that was mine alone. Caleb handled clients with the same calm he used when we planned that night in Sedona. "You finally look like you're breathing again," he said one afternoon as I adjusted mock-ups on the screen. "I guess silence suits me," I replied. He smiled. "Silence looks good on you, but don't make it your whole language." Maybe he was right. For years, silence had been my armor. Now it was becoming something else, space to create, not to hide. News from Sedona still found me occasionally, usually in headlines I didn't open. Elena had been indicted for fraud. The trial was ongoing. Marina had lost her job at the bank and was reportedly taking time off for personal matters. My father still lived in the house, though he'd sold part of the property to cover legal fees. I wondered if he still walked through those echoing halls at night, searching for a sound that made sense. But wondering didn't mean missing. I had learned the difference. One morning, a letter arrived at the studio, not from any of them, but from a new client. A small family-owned bakery wanted a full rebrand. The owner wrote, "We chose you because your work feels honest." I stared at that line for a long time. Honest. That word used to feel like a weapon in my house. Now it felt like home. Later that week, Renee flew from Chicago to visit. She walked into the studio with her soft smile and her quiet strength, carrying 2 sandwiches from my favorite deli she'd remembered. We didn't talk about Sedona or about the past. We didn't need to. Over lunch, she looked around the studio walls covered with sketches and swatches. "You made this from nothing," she said. "No," I replied. "I made it from silence." We both laughed, the easy kind, not the forced one I'd grown up around. That afternoon, after she left, I sat at my desk and wrote a thank you letter to the bakery, my first official client. It wasn't just gratitude for their business. It was a declaration written in a language that finally belonged to me. They used a language to hide from me, I wrote in my journal later that night. I used silence to free myself. The moon rose outside the studio window, pale and wide over the Phoenix skyline. I closed the lights, locked the door, and stood for a moment in the glow of my new life. No anger. No noise. Just peace that hummed like a song only I could hear. When family betrays you, the truth becomes your only inheritance. Thank you for listening till the end. Tell me in the comments, what does truth mean to you?